Hi. So I'm just gonna, hello everyone. Please take a seat and we will begin shortly. It's nice to see that all of you are energized and full with energy from the lunch outside, which was really nice. Welcome back to the second part of today's event. The new health action plan is our first topic, and it's a well-familiar concept for most of you in this room. In order to support the EU and its member states and to shape the global agenda, a new One Health action plan was broadened from the previous one, such as extending the approach to include the environment and tackling antibiotic resistance more comprehensively on the basis of improved data collection, monitoring and surveillance has been implemented to help develop innovative, effective and sustainable responses to fighting and understanding antibiotic resistance. Antibiotic resistance is not only a problem we face as humans, but it plays a huge part in both animals and environmental sectors, and therefore requires a multi-sectoral response, which we of course heard of in our first part today. This session will start off with our experienced panelists exploring and informing about what they do in their fields, and it will end with a Q&A where you, the audience, just like we did before, have a chance to ask your burning questions. And please don't forget, because perhaps not all of you will have the chance to address your questions, so please use the hashtag EAAD and our Facebook channel, and we'll try to answer all the questions. So please give a warm hand to our first panel. Our first speaker has a background in law, and his work ranges from policy development and implementation of issues pertaining to both the EU research and innovation framework programs and broader EU research and innovation policies. Welcome, DG Research and Innovation for the European Commission, Wolfgang Butcher.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for organizing this important awareness day for antibiotics. Research and innovation have brought us antimicrobials. This morning we have heard how important antibiotics are for human health. They have hugely contributed to the increase of our life expectancy, and Annelies has reminded us how important they are for all kinds of complex medical interventions, like chemotherapies for cancer, like hip transplantations, like organ replacements, all these kind of things. Against that background, evidently, we are risking to lose one of our cornerstones of our health systems if we have antibiotic resistance. And against that background, it is not surprising that the European Commission puts real focus on fighting antibiotic resistance. I think, as has convincingly done this morning Commissioner Andriukaitis, and as I'm sure also the new Commission will do. Now, when it comes to research and innovation, our focus is on the implementation of the European One Health action plan, which has also a pillar regarding research and innovation. I think Commissioner Andriukaitis has already recalled that we spent important sums for research and innovation in the area of antimicrobial research and innovation, about 1.9 billion euros since 1999 until the end of Horizon 2020. But evidently, that's no reason for complacency. We need to further increase our efforts, have common joint actions, and look at the relevant topics for research and innovation. Now, I would like to share with you just 3 examples of what we do under the last call in Horizon 2020 to give you a flavor of what is in particular for healthcare workers. One key element for healthcare workers is that they need the right tools to diagnose infectious diseases and to decide whether and what and which kind of antibiotics they will use. For that purpose, we have launched a public procurement call for innovative solutions for infectious diseases diagnostic. And the objective is that through such an innovative public procurement call, we create market uptake in Europe and we ensure economies of scale in Europe. Because one of the big issues about translating research and innovation into real life is that we do not have scale and scope. And we hope that through such public procurement calls for innovative solutions from public authorities, hospitals, we can contribute to this deployment. The second thing is healthcare workers are increasingly faced with antibiotic-resistant patients and face a situation where traditional solutions like isolation of patients, if there is resistant bacteria, do not work anymore. For that reason, we have launched another call who intends to prevent, to do research on the prevention of infectious diseases, in particular when it comes to hospital-acquired resistance. Here again, and I think that brings me back to this morning's discussion, our expectation is that we will have pilot projects in specific regions which will really, through practical examples and practical research and innovation, show how clinical management can prevent the deployment of infectious or of resistant bacteria. The last thing is, and maybe the most difficult thing is, the development of new medication, new drugs. In that context, we have launched a call that has as an objective to set up or to establish a sustainable European network of clinical studies. Presently, we finance, in particular in the context of IMI, quite a number of clinical trials. And the purpose of setting up this network of clinical studies is exactly to bring together the knowledge and knowledge that has been acquired in the context of these initiatives to further consider the development of new drugs. This is just 3 examples of what specifically we do in research and innovation to address the issue. Again, I think the key question is, and that was raised this morning, we need to focus on all elements of the chain: prevention, awareness, prevention, diagnosis, and treatment, and in research in all these areas, because in many respects we need research about social behavior to address the challenge. And the other issue, we really also need to consider who do we involve in the research and innovation. It's not only about involving academia and business, it's also about involving other end users of these technologies. Thank you.
Thank you, Wolfgang Burtscher. I'd like to ask you, what do you see are some of the current gaps within research and innovation in the EU? And how do you believe we can make it more sustainable?
I think one issue was raised this morning. Money is always an issue, and evidently we do not know how the new framework program for research and innovation will be equipped in financial terms. But I think this morning was already quite a good discussion because it has shown certain gaps. I think our colleague from Finland, she has referred to the gap that exists in research and innovation regarding data environment. That is an example. And evidently, the biggest gap, to a certain extent, if you want, is the one that the Court of Auditor has identified in his report on the work of the European Commission in terms of research and innovation. I'm not sure that he has got it right, but the key point he has identified is that it takes too long to translate research results from research to real life. And I think whoever works in research and innovation is aware that this is an issue that is not only relevant for antimicrobial resistance research, but this is an issue that is relevant for all kinds of research. And this is why I would like to come back on the question how important the governance of research and innovation is, the involvement of players to ensure that the research results are deployed. Evidently, in the specific area, we have really also an issue about market failures. You know very well the discussion, how much can you push research and innovation through grants in the area of antimicrobial resistance? But at one point in time, you need business to come in because they think this is a money maker. And this is what we are facing in the research relating to antimicrobial resistance, that we push very hard in terms of research and innovation. But evidently, on the pull side, there is not yet enough power to translate new technologies, new drugs to the healthcare system.
Mm. So, if we look at the AMR issue, in specifically, what would you say are the largest gap there? Could you identify that?
I think in the AMR issue, I think at least the point that is very well in the focus of the public debate is there is no new drug yet, in fact. There are promising avenues for projects which we are developing, for example, in the Innovative Medicine Initiative, but still this needs clinical trials, this still needs further work, this also needs further money. And I think that's a key question. But I would not overestimate the role of new drugs, because I think this morning we have discussed a lot about awareness raising. This is about today's activities, about prevention. And I really think also that research and innovation in making people change their behavior is very important if we want to have results that need to a lesser extent new drugs, because you address the problem up front, in fact.
One last question for you before we move forward. From the One Health perspective, is there any specific area, humans, animals, environment, that we need to do more research within, or is it?
I think it's always very difficult to design a research agenda that covers all relevant elements. This is why I think I have pleaded for really involving all possible stakeholders. But if you just look at it in terms of results, we have quite good results already in terms of the animal part, but still certainly further research is required there too. But in this One Health approach, I think that the points that both the Commissioner and you have mentioned is really about the environmental aspects, which there are still gaps.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker has experience in both health policy and urban health at WHO, Regional Office for Europe. It's now time to hear from Charles Price, DG Health and Food Safety at the European Commission. Please, Price.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. And I think we were all privileged to hear Commissioner Andrew Kaitis talking this morning in his last speech as the Commissioner for Health and Food Safety, with that very powerful words, I think, that he said on AMR will last with us for a long time to come. Just to recall, he said that there were 100 people a day dying from resistant infections, and most of those could be prevented using existing technologies in relation to reducing unnecessary and wasteful use of antibiotics in agriculture and in healthcare, and better prevention of infection. So what's the EU doing to tackle this challenge, this preventable challenge? He mentioned the 70 actions, the 9 policy areas which our One Health Action Plan is covering. And he mentioned, of course, trade, agriculture, food safety, public health, and we've now heard from Wolfgang Birch on the major research effort that we're putting into this area. Just want to highlight 2 or 3 other points. Finland reminded us that the member states had committed themselves to doing a range of actions on antimicrobial resistance. And this is very important for the EU because, of course, in the healthcare system, it is member states who are responsible for health policy and for healthcare. But the Commission is supporting in other ways. He mentioned our legislation. We've supplemented our ban on the use of antimicrobials as growth promoters in livestock now with new pharmaceutical legislation which will also prevent the preventive use of antimicrobials in animals and also restrict certain antimicrobials for human use and make compulsory data on surveillance and use of those antimicrobials. Secondly, and that's very important from the field I come from in public health, non-legislative. And here we're trying to support member states through technical guidance from EMA, from EFSA, from ECDC, and supporting using our budgetary resources through the health programme, a joint action on antimicrobial resistance where member states exchange information and knowledge on developing and implementing national action plans, on vaccination, and we will announce very shortly several million support for stakeholders to help implement EU guidelines on antimicrobial use in human health. We shouldn't get too carried away by the size of the EU budget. As Commissioner Andrew Kite has mentioned, the whole of the EU health programme expenditure on AMR over the last few years is equivalent to about €0.5 per European per year. So we have to use our funds very carefully. And finally, he mentioned the global action and the commitment by the Commission to advocate for new global action on AMR with our partners, with WHO, OIE, FAO, and most importantly with countries. We've been working on AMR for a few years now, so how far have we got? There's some encouraging signs with the 30% reduction in the sales of use, which were mentioned by our colleague this morning, for use in animals. ECDC are reporting today that there's been some reduction also in the human health field, about 6% reduction in the use of antimicrobials in human health between 2013 and 2018. And there's also been some examples of reductions in resistant infections, for example, MRSA. And of course, there are some outstanding examples of countries, such as Sweden, I think that's the one country we can mention today, who've had great success on reducing resistant infections overall. So we know it can be done, and in the next 5 years, we've really got to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles Price. So you mentioned within the next few years. If we fast forward, it's 5 years ahead. What do we need to do during these 5 years to see a substantial change, or what else do we need to do from your perspective, where you come from?
We need to fully implement our EU action plan, but even more importantly, we need to fully implement the national action plans at national and indeed the local level action. That's where it all really happens and where it really counts. It's with farmers, it's with veterinarians, it's with health professionals to actually use antimicrobials in a prudent way and to have effective prevention of infection. That includes the care of animals, which was also stressed this morning, so that you don't need antibiotics because those animals are looked after in a way which prevents infection, and the care of humans in healthcare settings, whether it be hospitals, long-term care, or primary care. We can do an enormous amount there. We've got examples of where it's already been done. We need to do it across the whole of the EU.
Can I just ask you, because many of you speakers has mentioned we need to implement the National Action Plan more. You know, we've heard that many times. Why aren't we going forward on that?
I think you've got many representatives of countries here who you could ask that, but I'm very mindful as a official in the European Commission that we've been asked by member states in the Council to look into this question, to look into what are the barriers for implementation. And I'm sure that we will be considering how, with member states, of course, and with stakeholders, how we can do that to answer this very important question.
Thank you very much, Charles Price. We're moving forward to our next speaker, who has an extensive background in research of antimicrobial consumption and surveillance of antimicrobial resistance in both hospitals and primary care. Our next speaker has devoted most of his professional life in combating these issues. Please welcome the head of Antimicrobial Resistance and Healthcare-Associated Infections Program at ECDC, Dominique Monet.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to all of you. So you will get slides for this one because we felt it was difficult to talk about data without showing you data. And today, ECDC is releasing 2 reports, one on surveillance of antimicrobial resistance in Europe. It's our usual report from the EARSnet, the Network of Surveillance of Antimicrobial Resistance, and the 2018 data. And in the center, you have a similar report for antimicrobial consumption in humans in Europe. And I will also cover a publication that was in Eurosurveillance last week that makes sense of trying to analyze those data and put them in perspective. So let's look at one of the indicators that the agencies, EFSA, EMA, and ECDC developed to say, could we have indicators that we all use? Some of the indicators are for animal health, some of the indicators are for human health, and this is the primary indicator for antibiotic consumption in humans. It's the total consumption of antibacterial for systemic use, or antibiotics, for the community and the hospital sector combined, so they all put together. And here you will have the trends for the period 2009-2018. And you should go all the way down this slide. And you see that if you look at the average for the EU, it's increasing, but at one point, there's some kind of tipping point, and it starts decreasing, and that's what Charles Price just mentioned. If we look at the period 2013-2018, there has been a 6.5% decrease in antibiotic use. And this is because many of the countries have actually achieved decreases in their own right. We have 11 countries that during this period, 2009-2018, have achieved a decrease. When we come to resistance, well, in the EARSnet report, you will find maps such as this one, and I voluntarily pick Klebsiella pneumoniae, which is a pathogen commonly responsible for healthcare-associated infections, and resistance to the carbapenems that are a last line of antibiotics. And unfortunately, we still see increase in many countries, but there's one country, Italy, that has been showing a decrease over the past 4 years, sorry. And this is due to the actions taken in this country. Italy also has shown a decrease in the community. And the colleagues from Italy may want to speak further later, but we see it as an example of a country that have had issues, that took action, and things are starting to change. So in Eurosurveillance last week, we tried to make sense of those data. And at the top of this graph, of this slide, you have 3 graphs. This is the consumption of third-generation cephalosporins on the left, fluoroquinolones in the middle. These are what we call broad-spectrum antibiotics. They should not be used for all types of indication. They should be reserved for those patients that are a bit more severe. They are available as injectable, but also as an oral form. So they're used outside of hospitals. And then the last one on the right are the carbapenems, again, the last line group of antibiotics, and they're only injectable, and they're used in hospitals and other healthcare settings. And what we saw is that there seemed to be a halt in the increase of the consumption of these antibiotics, in particular for the carbapenems on the right. So now at the bottom, we have resistance in 2 types of bacteria, Klebsiella pneumoniae and Escherichia coli, and we see the similar stop in the increase. And the stop in the increase happens about the same year or just 1 or 2 years later. So for us, that's the first indication that all the efforts that have been done may start to bear fruit. There are probably several explanations on top of the one that we try to put forward here, but we take this as an encouragement that yes, the efforts of everybody, of all the people in this room, of member states, may start to bear fruit. I will finish with this slide from the ECDC website. ECDC is not just doing surveillance as per its mandate and trying to make sense of the surveillance data, but this is the website where you will find, for example, our rapid risk assessment that we produce regularly when there is a cross-border threat that is identified. This is where you will find the reports from the country visits that we're doing upon invitation, and together with DG Santé of the European Commission. This is where you will find our directory of online resources if you're trying to find guidelines of one or another topic. This is where they will be. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dominique Monet. From the data you just showed us, we could see a plateau, and you said, of course, that the reason for this might be, or is, that all the work is paying off. But can you identify other reasons why we might see this?
Well, they can be technical artifacts. You could say, well, look, if the hospitals that report, especially for the resistance data, if the hospitals that report data from one year to another are changing, well, that could just explain the change. But we check this. And actually, if we take exactly the same hospitals for every year, we get the same curves. One explanation is, as always, when we talk about antibiotic, that's what we try to show here. But of course, the other part of the puzzle is hygienic practices, what we call in our language infection prevention and control. If this have changed, there will be less transmission and there will be less infection with those resistant bacteria. This is probably very true for carbapenem-resistant Klebsiella pneumoniae. But from what we've seen, we see more actions in member states. Almost all member states have a national action plan, and the actions are getting implemented. And we need to watch this space. We need to do more to support countries, but that's really something happening.
And do you think, when will we see, now it's a plateau, when will we actually see it going down?
It's a long battle.
It's a long battle.
It's a long battle. I would say the first discussions in Europe about antibiotic resistance, that's September 1998. And there have been council recommendations, all set of council conclusions, one action plan, a second action plan, the one that is active right now, several action plans in member states. It may take a few more years.
But you're hopeful we'll see it?
We didn't expect to see this.
Okay.
So that's why I'm hopeful, because we didn't expect such results.
Thank you very much, Dominique Monet. We'll get back to you later. Our next speaker has a background in agricultural research and technology. And after joining the European Food Safety Authority in 2003, our next speaker has held several positions, serving as both the head of the Biological Hazards Unit to acting head of the Scientific Assistant Department. Please welcome the serving chief scientist at the European Food Safety Authority, Marta Hugas.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you also to the ECDC colleagues and to Andrea for the invitation being here today. It's very rewarding to see also the interest that this day has increased along the years, with also so many stakeholders here today and so many people from the media also. So I think that together we will really make a difference. I have very high hopes on that. So I come from EFSA, the European Food Safety Authority, and EFSA is the EU agency responsible for risk assessment on food and feed safety. We provide advice to the European Commission so that the policies they build are based on science, on scientific evidence. And in the case of AMR, this means that we support decision-making on the possible emergence, spread of AMR in food-producing animals, and also the transfer from animals to humans through the food chain and or the animal environment. And I will give you some examples of what EFSA has done so far in relation to AMR. And it started already back in 2007 when we looked into the role of food as a vehicle for antimicrobial resistance. And the conclusion at that time was that it was very difficult to quantify the human exposure to bacteria via the food chain. But what it was very clear is that any increase of the resistant bacteria in food will likely have an impact on the levels of resistance in human pathogens. So since then, we have also been assisting the Commission in producing risk assessment on emerging issues. For example, on methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, also on ESBLs, and also on carbapenemases. And these opinions have provided an analysis of risk factors, but also possible mitigation options so that the Commission could also reflect on what needs to be implemented at the policy level. Another important example of EFSA work is the annual monitoring of the situation of antimicrobial resistance in food and animals across the European Union. And these annual reports on AMR are produced together with ECDC, and the next one will be published in February 2020. You could also visit our website, and where we have also infographics that help also to explain what's the situation in different member states, in different animals, and regard different antimicrobials. In doing so, we are assisted by member states. We have a network of zoonosis monitoring data, which is competent authorities and member states that collect the data and assist EFSA by gathering and sharing the information on zoonotic diseases in their respective member states. And many improvements have already been made on data collection. We have now more quantitative data, we have more isolate-based data, and also we have harmonized interpretative criteria. So we have been progressing in giving real data that helps a lot. So we can now give more sophisticated analysis, which allows us to inform better the policymakers. Our latest report have shown that resistance is not uncommon in zoonotic bacteria from humans and in food-producing animals. We know that. And although resistant levels are very diverse in different member states, and we cannot generalize, in some cases they are alarmingly high. So action is needed. However, when member states have implemented stringent policies, AMR has decreased in animals. So there is hope. And there is also examples from some member states which could serve as inspiration to other member states to set up policies. And the good news is that the levels of co-resistance to critically important antimicrobials remain low. AMR is the paradigm of One Health. And so that's why we are used to work with the colleagues from our sister agencies, ECDC and EMA, on this important issue. And since 2015, we have published together a biannual joint analysis of the relationship between the use of antimicrobials and the occurrence of resistance. The next one will be published by the end of 2020, and we published last year. And some results from the last year one were that at the comparisons between consumption data in food-producing animals and the level of resistance in human bacteria, some positive associations were observed with fluoroquinolones, with microlides, and tetracyclines. Also, together with EMA, we published what we call the RONAFA opinion, an opinion where we explore the measures to reduce the use and the need to use antimicrobials in food-producing animals. The conclusion is that there is time, and it's now there are options that we can reduce, we can replace, and we can rethink the use of antimicrobials in animals. And a set of measures were recommended, and not a single measure can do a lot, but the combination of different measures can really have an important impact. Recently, we have also been asked by the colleagues in the Commission to assess together with EMA on this legislation that the Commissioner this morning also mentioned, the maximal concentrations of antimicrobials in non-medicated feed due to cross-contamination that would not have an effect on the development of antimicrobial resistance and or growth promotion activity. And another important activity we are embarking now, and has also mentioned this morning, is focuses on the role played by food-producing environment on AMR. And we also, here we have requested the the assistance of the CDC colleagues, Emma, but also the Environmental European Agency, which also has responsibilities on environmental, because this is an area where we have few data and we need to invest the data collection and also the identifying the pathways where resistance can happen so that we can propose intervention strategies. Recently, EFSA, and you will have also these results in your folder today, we commissioned an Eurobarometer on food safety risks. And this Eurobarometer shows that the misuse of antibiotics in farm animals is on the radar of the citizens across the EU. 2 out of 3 of the citizens, and the survey interviewed more than 30,000 citizens, have heard about AMR, and they see it as a high food-related. This also tells us that these results tells us that there is a high awareness among consumers. So this provides a good basis for effective campaigns on reducing the spread of AMR. But we still have some challenges ahead. Let me maybe list 2. And one is that we need further improved data. The use of whole genome sequencing can improve the antimicrobial resistance monitoring in food and in animals. And ahead of the revised legislation on AMR monitoring that is due to come forth into 2021, EFSA has suggested that these new methods, these molecular typing methods, could also be gradually introduced into member states' monitoring activities, so that giving us better ground for further understanding this important topic. And then maybe the second challenge that has already been mentioned by also the Commissioner this morning is that it's not enough that we in the EU work together. We need an integrated approach with all relevant players in the food chain, not only in the EU, but also beyond globally. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martha Hukas. I think you mentioned that the resistance levels are very diverse in different member states. But when policies are in place, AMR decreases. Do you have a concrete example of that?
There will be several, but maybe the one that is more known, because also they were the first, is the Netherlands. The Netherlands, they took a political decision to set up reducing targets for the reducing use of antibiotics. And since then, that was already some years ago, there's been an important decrease in resistance, about 68% with some antimicrobials, more than 80%, for example, regarding colistin, without having an impact on the production of food-producing animals. So I think there are interesting examples for member states to look at and then implement them back home.
Thank you. And also, there is, like you mentioned, there's a high awareness in food spreading. But what is the actual role in the spreading?
Well, food is a vehicle, because if we take raw food of animal origin that has a number of bacteria in it, and then we cook, then we are not, by the cooking, we kill those bacteria, but by handling them, we also increase the cross-contamination, and also at home. So that's why it's also very important, the 5 hygienic rules from WHO of washing hands. But the food is the vehicle for dissemination from animals to humans.
Thank you very much, Martha Hugas. Moving forward, our last speaker of this part of the program has a background as an EMA pediatric coordinator and specializes in infectious diseases, the scientific officer of Anti-Infectives and Vaccine Scientific and Regulatory Management Department at the European Medicines Agency. Rade Botros, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to the ECDC for inviting me here. I'm very glad to be in front of this distinguished audience to make you a little bit aware of the activities that the EMA is conducting in the area of antimicrobial resistance in order to tackle it as per the One Health plan. We have a number of activities that we conduct. Some of them focus on medicine developers. We are, of course, the regulator for medicines. And so there we have conducted regular updates of our guidance documents for medicine developers in this area, so essentially for development of antibiotics. It may be interested for some of you that we have a revision of the guideline on antibacterials, for which we for which the public consultation has recently closed, and this is something now in the phase of looking at the comments received and going forward for adopting it. And I think this is an important piece of information for medicines developers in this area. Another important thing is that we constantly interact with our international counterparts, with regulators, in particular with the United States Food and Drug Administration, but also with countries, authorities from countries like Canada and Japan. We have a number of activities together because, of course, it's important to have a development which satisfies as many jurisdictions as possible, rather than having to conduct different development programs in different parts of the world. We also have activities that focus on alternative therapy to antibiotics. And here I'm thinking of bacteriophages, I'm thinking of monoclonal antibodies, or even therapeutic vaccines. And we have recognized that there are still difficulties with some of them in terms of development. We try to contact and have discussions with developers in these areas to try to understand how to best possibly help them to further develop such products, which we believe will be important, of great importance actually. We also have, during the last 10 years or more, constantly worked into harmonizing and modernizing the product information of old antibiotics. This is, in our view, very important because healthcare practitioners throughout the EU should have actual up-to-date information as to how to use those medicines. Of course, as a regulator of medicines, we have a number of tools available, and we try to make best use of them to help, fasten the approval of medicines that address an unmet medical need. And we have some of those tools are part of the legislation, like conditional approval or approval under exceptional circumstances. Then we have the possibility of a fast-track approval, but we also have programs that the agency has developed, like the Prime Medicines project, which looks essentially into precisely providing to developers that have medicines in the area of unmet medical need early regulatory support to speed up the approval of such medicines. And then I think it's also important to mention that recently we have bolstered the early engagement with developments of medicines that tackle AMR. We have at the level of the agency task force, an innovative task force, where such medicines can contact us and can get in touch with us at an early stage of development to get advice and try to put these medicines forward as quick as possible. Last but not least, I should mention that we have, of course, I'm coming from the human side of the agency, but of course there are activities in the veterinary sector which are very important in the framework of the One Health approach, and I think some of them have been mentioned by my colleagues already, but essentially we are providing, at the request of the European Commission, we are providing scientific opinions on various issues, and we have done, it's the RONAFAB, as was already mentioned, but also others. We have done together an opinion on the impact of the use of antibiotics for the human and animal health, which led to some categorization of various classes of antibacterials and their risk, the potential risk of being used. Importantly, in this area also we are conducting we are providing input on the new on the new legislation, veterinary legislation. So I will stop here because I don't want to monopolize the time, but I think there are numbers of activities that we believe are important, and we hope to contribute as best as possible to this important topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Radu. I have a question for you. The interaction with international regulators is very important in EMA activities. I know that, but how is it helpful in the fight against AMR?
I think it's important because, again, in order to be able to bring products, medicinal products, antibiotics on the market, it's important also for pharmaceutical companies to have as much as possible a development that satisfies more than one jurisdiction. And this is why we are conducting, first of all, we have had a number of tripartite meetings with our American and Japanese colleagues in order to try to identify the so-called low-hanging fruits. So those situations in which we could quickly agree on clinical endpoints, for instance, for clinical studies that would be and could be the same in all those areas. And this is, I'm happy to say that in areas like uncomplicated urinary tract infection, uncomplicated gonorrhea, we have been already able to update our guidance as a result of those discussions. And the other important point is that we conduct monthly teleconferences with our counterparts to discuss specifically products and to try to understand, what can be really harmonized so that the development is brought to a higher speed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, of course. Before we go for Q&A, I have a question for all of you. Some of you answered it, but if you can sort of specify more. Do you think the actions so far, and I know you don't, have delivered the results you hoped for, perhaps, but what else do we need to do? What is lacking now to move forward? I start with you, Wolfgang Butcher.
Thank you very much. Indeed, I've tried to indicate where I think we have to act. But in terms of research and innovation, I really feel that, firstly, we carefully listen to all the stakeholders, to the implementers, what a relevant research agenda should be. I think that is very decisive that we get the topic right. And the second issue which we really need to focus, and that's related to the first issue, who do we need to have on board to ensure that research results are deployed? That's the point you have made. We need regulators, but we also need investment tools to ensure that new technologies are deployed, and that's also true for the antimicrobial resistance drugs, in fact.
Thank you. Charles Price, would you agree or...
Just a couple of things. I would fully endorse what Marta Hergas said about the introduction of the latest technology for AMR surveillance, using whole genome sequencing and using the latest information technology to analyze that. I think that's going to give us a huge leap forward in terms of knowing where infections precisely, where organisms have come from, where were they last, were they in animals earlier, which hospital were they in, have they crossed borders, and that's going to inform public health staff about what to do. But I think there needs to be a huge increase in the capacities of public health and infection control. And many member states don't even recognise the specialty of specialists of infectious diseases. Neither do they recognise the specialty of infection control nurse. And the ECDC's produced guidance in relation to what is good practice on infection prevention and control, including staffing, minimum staffing. And we need to achieve those. We actually need also, when we have member states where the capacities to actually analyse what's going on the public health system and take action there are very weak. And there needs to be investment in those capacities, human resources. Now, where's that money coming from? Because it's highly competitive. Some money can come from the EU, and that's something that we will do more on. We've been recommended by the Court of Auditors to do more on, and we will do it. And that is making information available on how EU funding, EU structural funding, but we've also heard about how EU agricultural funding can be used to modernise farming practices and to modernise healthcare. But clearly, our colleagues in member states also need help to know what those funds are and to make the case for using those funds on antimicrobial resistance issues rather than some of the other priorities. And there are choices to be made at member state level on how to use funds. And we are there, and if anybody out there wants to help, ask me or email us, and we can advise you. Those are just some of the things. I think there's a whole host of other things, but just a few which we in the public health side of Ante will be focusing on.
Thank you. And Dominic Monet, you will, in our second panel, you will speak a lot about the survey, and I think we'll perhaps find a few answers there, but can you also answer the question?
Well, Charles just mentioned whole genome sequencing or next generation sequencing. This is something that at ECDC was supporting member states to build capacity. We will ultimately integrate this into surveillance, but we're already using it when we have outbreaks to actually assert that there has been a cross-border transfer of resistant bacteria. And we're putting this as part of the evidence in our rapid risk assessment. But if we really want to change, I mean, the change will take place in member states, the change will take place in regions, the change will take place in hospitals in those regions and in wards in those hospitals. This is very far away from ECDC. But there's still one mechanism that the countries can use, is to invite both DG Santé and ECDC to perform a 1 week, what we call country visit. And there are people in this room that can probably give their experience about this. I'm thinking about Italy, I'm thinking about Belgium, I'm thinking about Ireland more recently. But I think this is, of course, upon invitation, a way where ECDC can provide an independent assessment of the situation and provide option for actions for moving forward.
Thank you very much. Martha Hugas, do you have any specifics that you see that we need to do more?
Well, I think the elucidation of the role of the environment, as already been mentioned, is an area where we need to invest to see what are the pathways, to collect also more data. Traditionally, the focus has been on food-producing animals and not so much in other environmental areas and other areas in agriculture. So that's from an evidence side that we need to find it out. But then I think there is already a lot of evidence out there that if some measures are implemented, a big impact has seen in the reduction of antibiotics in animals. So there's an invitation for member states to look at the successful countries, raising also awareness among the professionals in member states on the veterinary and agricultural side to implement measures that have a high return of investment if they are done.
Thank you very much. And it's time for our Q&A. And I'm turning now to the member states. I think we have, and I'll ask you to represent your name and which country you represent, please. I have a first question.
Thank you. Hi, my name is John Stanik, and I'm working for Healthcare Without Harm Europe, which is the European arm of a global NGO which tries to make the healthcare system more sustainable. And I'm working on the issue of pharmaceuticals in the environment and its impact on the development and spread of antimicrobial resistance. And I had a question for the representative from the EMA, especially looking at the issue of environmental risk assessment. Because now we're looking at what the EMA is doing, to address the question of AMR, but for the time being, AMR is still not included in environmental risk assessment. So I wanted to see whether there would be progress on this aspect. Thank you.
Would like to take that. I'm sorry, can you state the question again? We had a hard time hearing it, if you could.
Yes, sure. So it's, the question is about environmental risk assessment for drugs that we market through the EMA. And the fact that, so the question is about how AMR should be or will be integrated in environmental risk assessment.
Thank you very much. So I'm happy to tell you that the environmental risk assessment is an integrative part of the assessment of any new antibiotic that is approved centrally. And of course, all the requirements that are made to the the studies that are requested to make sure whether an antibiotic is or is not harming the environment, and what are the measures to dispose such an antibiotic. All of this is part of the current assessment of products, and this is, of course, with a view to make sure that they are not disposed in an improper way that would pose a risk and would of course in time create resistance.
Sorry, just to clarify my question. So I was thinking about the development of AMR in the environment, so which is for the time being not included in environmental risk assessment.
Well, development of AMR in the environment is unfortunately not, the regulator of medicines looks at the benefit risk of a medicine when approving it. And of course, it's looking into monitoring of resistance ongoing afterwards in all kind of, post-authorization procedures that we have. And, if there is, any reason to believe that development of resistance, if it is noticed, is, due to a certain factor, if there is a signal, then this is, of course, looked into and, taken forward, confirmed, or on the contrary. So I think there are activities that are looking into that, albeit, on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you. Do we have, please, representative from...
Good afternoon. My name is Jérôme Weinbach from the French Ministry of Health. I'm a EU Affairs Counselor. I have a question to the four of you. We are talking about One Health. So to your opinion, is the cooperation between the agencies, EU agencies, and the Commission optimal? And if not, what could you do in the future to improve the collaborative work between agencies to tackle globally common issues such as drug shortage versus epidemiology and monitoring and antibiotic stewardship and so on? So
we're already working together a lot. Please come back in 1 year from now, and you will have a fantastic report with many years and trends on consumption of antibiotics in food animals and in human health, and resistance associated to those. So we're working all the time together. When it comes to giving advice, it's either a request from the European Commission, and the European Commission, I would say now, almost all the time, if the mandate is under one agency, the letter includes, you must work with the two other agencies. There's an absent on this at this table. That's the European Environmental Agency. But I've been personally at meetings at the European Environmental Agency, and I suppose that this fourth agency will be more and more involved in what we do.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to say, first of all, we have the representatives from the countries, member countries. Is there anyone? No? Okay, then I'm sorry, we'll go first to that question.
Yes, thank you. So I'm Anne-Marie Borg, and I'm representing the European Public Health Alliance and the AMR Stakeholder Network today. That's made up of 80 organizations and individuals committed to tackling AMR. The title of this panel said, what are we doing now at EU level, and what's the way forward? And I think taking stock, and Charles mentioned the action plan. So the European Commission has 70 actions, and when we look back today, a number of stakeholders are a bit worried about tangible progress, not only at EU level, but also on the ground. And member states are aware that this is a cross-border challenge, and we cannot tackle it alone. So I think we would like to see more EU leadership, and if we want to make Europe a best practice region in AMR, and a number of stakeholders have come together and today released a roadmap for action with 5 key strategies and targets. And my question would be that we would really like to see in the coming years, in the new mandate of the Commission, some progress in terms of setting perhaps EU targets. And I would be interested to see if that's something that perhaps is already being considered, so that we can say by a certain date, for example, all EU countries have reduced antibiotic consumption or AMR or healthcare-associated infections by a certain percentage, because there are huge variations across Europe, and we would like to have a more harmonious approach on the ground. And there are also other areas that we feel there could be more progress on, so that we can really look back then 5 years from now and say Europe has made a big step forward. And civil society, this was a point that was raised earlier, really feel that we should play a more important role in this. And there was a point on the AMR One Health network that we would like to be more involved in discussions, because we feel that we can really play a role and provide some valuable input also from the ground. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Good question. Stakeholders need to be more involved. Charles Price, what do you say about that?
Thank you very much, Anne-Marie and Eva, for those questions and points. I think, first of all, I would like to start with the first point, if that's okay.
Sure, please.
On EU leadership, because I think we've got a lot to be proud of. And I think the EU was actually the first region of the world, at least that I'm aware of, which was talking in 2000 about One Health policies and putting that as the centrepiece of their action. And subsequently, commissioners, including Commissioner Andriukaitis, have gone out on the world stage. He was in the UN, he was at WHO, he's been going around talking to ministers, not just inside the EU, but outside the EU, all over the world on this topic and pushing it forward. And we've been investing. I think a study was done of the EU research on AMR, bearing in mind that the EU Commission has a budget, but so do all the member states, and so do the drug companies, and funding a substantial proportion of the total amount in the EU being done on AMR, something in the region of 50%. And that's more than in most other research fields. So I think we've got a very good track record, and I think that it's clear that our EU President-elect, Ursula von der Leyen, has gone out and made clear that we're going to continue that leadership with the mandate to Commissioner Designate for Health, Stella Kyriakides, and she's made that clear. So I think we've got a lot to be proud of. And on the targets, well, we note that. I mean, I think targets can be very helpful for coordinating action and for helping you to orientate where you're going. I think that we recognise that, first of all, the member states have asked themselves in the Council conclusions, both in 2016 and more recently in 2019, to reflect on the use of targets. We're there and our agencies are there to help support them in terms of what indicators might be appropriate, and I'm sure that we'll have further discussions on that with the new Commissioner for Health about whether any of those should be translated into EU level. And lastly, I think we agree with you that we'd like to work more closely with stakeholders. I think we started much more with member states, but with our new announcement that I made a minute ago about support for stakeholder action, financial support on implementing guidelines, we've got also very important stakeholder platform as part of the joint action on health on AMR and healthcare associated infection, and we'll be looking to see what comes out of that in terms of what future actions we can take with stakeholders. So I think we're out there, we're ready to listen to you. I think to any of you in this room, either on an individual or a collective basis, in terms of what more we could do together.
Thank you. Any? Yes, please.
Hi, Steve Hallahan from EP Rumour. We're a collection of representative organisations of farmers, veterinarians, feed producers and pharmaceutical manufacturers. First of all, thank you to the ECDC for inviting us here. And secondly, a question for Dr. Hugest, maybe on some of your research. Clearly you said there seems to be a fairly direct correlation between those countries which have reduced antibiotic consumption and the reduction in AMR, which is fantastic. And as an organisation, we're very proud of the work of our members to reduce the sales or the consumption of antibiotics by a third over the last 6 years. And this is clearly after antibiotics have not been used for growth promotion. However, I was a little bit concerned about your statistic regarding 2/3, I think, of EU citizens felt that they were concerned about misuse of antibiotics in food animals. I suppose given the progress that's been made, and it is a work in progress, clearly some countries have made greater inroads into reduction of antibiotic consumption than others, so there's a lot more work to be done. But first of all, I suppose what was meant by the term misuse in terms of asking the question, and secondly, I guess, does it give a slightly outdated view? I know it's the current view of people of citizens by poll, but I guess maybe do you think it reflects our inability as professionals to get across what we've done, that we're on the road to making inroads in the animal health industry against AMR?
Well, thank you for your question. It's not 2/3, it's 50% that they are concerned about it, and this might be right or wrong, but there is a concern about the citizens. So that was a survey that we tasked, and there were the results we got from the survey. As we also saw many differences in member states. So in some member states, for example, it was a high concern on pesticides, in other words on AMR. So that's what the population, what's the expression of the population, what are their concerns. That doesn't mean that there is reality behind that. We know that, for example, residues in antibiotics, we have also a yearly report on residues veterinary drugs, and we see that this is not a real issue there, but that it's about talking about the concern. So when talking about food, consumers are concerned about using too many antibiotics in animals, for example. That's a reality. And that's how far our research went in that particular context.
Thank you. We have time for one last question. I believe, yes, thank you.
Hi, I'm Eva Garmendi. I work at Uppsala University at the Uppsala Antibiotic Center, and I would like to take the opportunity to perhaps open the discussion about the European Commission role when it comes to polluting the environment in other parts of the world, in the manufacturing chain, and what can we do here from Europe to prevent the huge impact that pollution in manufacturers has on AMR?
Yes, who'd like to answer that? Charles.
Thanks very much for that question. Just to say, we've got, of course, the European strategy in relation to pharmaceuticals in the environment, the communication released earlier this year. And I think one of the things, therefore, that we can do is show some good practice and leadership ourselves. Clearly, as our own action plan communication points out, that there's a lot that we need to know. I'm not saying that we don't know already that there's very high levels of antibiotic and antimicrobial pollution in hotspots around the world. And some of those hotspots, we need to acknowledge, are making antibiotics for the European market. And clearly that is of concern. Now, I'm not from that field, but I do understand that people are looking at whether aspects relating to the production of pharmaceuticals, including antibiotics, could be taken more into account in terms of the procurement, the purchasing, the importation requirements to the EU. And that's clearly something which I don't have the detail on, but it's clearly an additional level where we could have a purchase. And lastly, I think that we need to acknowledge also that the EU's got a role in development cooperation and supporting good practice. It's not just about us making changes to our EU regulations in relation to trade, but we can also reach out to countries. And we are already supporting a range of activities, also with WHO and the tripartite in Latin America, in sub-Saharan Africa. We'll also be looking to extend that to Asia in the coming years. And I think that, plus other financial and technical support instruments that we can run, also plays a very important role in this area.
Thank you very much. And for those of you who I'm sorry, we don't have time for all questions, but please use our Facebook channel or use your own Twitter account, the hashtag EAAD. And a warm welcome to our excellent panel. Thank you for your insights. Thank you. So it's time for our... It's now time for our second panel. We're not finished. We'll go on in just a few seconds. Thank you. And it's time now for our second part, where ECDC will... I'm just going to have everyone sit. Thank you. So it's now time for our second and last panel, which is a very, very interesting one. Is the survey of healthcare workers' knowledge and attitudes about antibiotics and antibiotic resistance, EU EEA 2019. So earlier this year, over 18,000 health workers reaching over 30 European countries participated in a survey targeting knowledge and attitudes regarding antibiotics and antibiotic resistance. We've spoken about it a few times already here today. And like I said, it's the first of its kind, and it's the first multi-country and multi-professional study conducted in this field. So it has a huge, huge value. And I'm so happy to have this panel here with us today who will elaborate more on this. To present, Dominic Monet, Head of the Antimicrobial Resistance and Healthcare Associate Infections Program. Please, Dominic.
Thank you. So we made you wait until now to show you these results. Sorry, I'm trying hard. Doing my best.
It's not working?
No, it's not working. No, you do it from there.
Okay.
I will say next. So next, please. So ECDC didn't do it by itself. So we had a contractor and colleagues at Public Health England, and they conceived the survey. There was a project advisory group with representatives from each of the countries we work with, that is the EU member states, plus Iceland and Norway. And then representative of those EU stakeholders organizations, and many of you are in this room. Thank you very much for helping us pulling this together in a record time of about 1 year. Next, please. So what was the aim of the study? You've heard about the Eurobarometer. You heard about the new Eurobarometer on food safety. Well, there's a Eurobarometer on antimicrobial resistance, where standardized panels of citizens from each country are being asked questions specifically on antibiotics and antibiotic use and antibiotic resistance. But we didn't have similar data for healthcare workers or all these people that work in hospitals and other healthcare settings. So we wanted to have a broad understanding of what is the knowledge, the perception of those healthcare workers, so we would have data so we can learn from this and build future action, because we feel that we've done a lot in terms of awareness for the general public as part of the European Antibiotic Awareness Day campaign and the related national campaign, but possibly not enough for healthcare workers. And of course, if we have this, and if we're able to repeat the same survey over the years, we may see an improvement, or we would like to see an improvement in the knowledge and the capacities of healthcare workers in this area. Next. So our contractor based the questionnaire around what we call the COM-B system, which means that if there is capability, knowledge, and if there are opportunities to perform the right behavior, and there is the right motivation, then behavior should change. 30 countries participated, more than 18,000 replies in quite a short time. It's a bit more than a month. 80% of the countries met or exceeded their quota sample size. They had to achieve a certain quota sample size, so we could say, well, that represents the healthcare workers in the countries. But we also wanted a quota sample size for physicians overall, for nursing professionals overall, for midwives overall, for pharmacists overall, and then, if possible, for each profession in each country. So if you're coming from a member state, please look where your country achieved the quota sample size, and that these data are more reliable than when you have 10, 20 replies for one profession. So the first one was, what is the perceived capability, knowledge of those healthcare workers? I know what antibiotic resistance is, more than 90%. They know, they're very confident that they know. I know what information to give to individuals about prudent use of antibiotics and antibiotic resistance, very high. I have sufficient knowledge about how to use antibiotics appropriately for my current practice. So fine, we have very confident healthcare workers. Some are working in the community as general practitioners, others are working in hospitals. But what is it in reality? Well, we had questions. So the first questions are the same as in the Eurobarometers, and the other questions were questions that we think would be more relevant for healthcare workers. And the first questions, healthcare workers actually know what antibiotic resistance is, know that antibiotics do not work on viruses. As a comparison, the general public in the EU would reply to those questions would give the proper reply in only 43% of the cases. So the healthcare workers know better. But when you start moving at the bottom, healthy people can carry antibiotic-resistant bacteria, and that's why we want to diagnose them. That's why we want to see if they are carriers, and if they enter healthcare, we want to isolate them from other patients. Well, that's the percentage of knowledge is already decreasing. Antibiotic-resistant bacteria can spread from person to person. I mean, that's daily business, daily infection control business in hospitals, even less knowledge. And every person treated with antibiotics is at increased risk for antibiotic-resistant infection. And in this, we included the Clostridium difficile, and there's even less knowledge. So definitely an area where we can work in the future. We also asked the respondents if they knew and if they could list the WHO 5 moments for hand hygiene in healthcare. That means before touching a patient, before performing an aseptic procedure, after having been in contact with body fluids, after having touched the patient, and after having touched the environment. These are the basic of people working in healthcare, and only 56% said they can list them. We don't know if they know them. We just asked whether they could list them. So it's really perceived capability. And then the nurse and nursing associate were significantly more likely than other healthcare workers to report that they perform hand hygiene in a complicated situation, which is using gloves when dealing with patients and soiled and biological materials, but you still need to remove your gloves and perform hand hygiene afterwards. And the nurses were very good at this, the doctors were less good. What about motivation? I know there's a connection between my prescribing or dispensing or administering of antibiotics and emergence and spread of antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Almost all of them say, I know. But when you ask them, I have a key role in helping control antibiotic resistance, well, certainly it's 62%. Like the responsibility is somewhere else. It's not mine. And there's a discrepancy here that we can discuss afterwards. The people that felt more in charge were actually the community doctors, the GPs. Of course, they're alone, they're facing a patient, and they have control of what is happening. What was the percentage of respondents that agreed that there had been good promotion of prudent antibiotic use and information about antibiotic resistance in their country? There are variations between countries, but overall only 41%. So we can do more. We can do more to support member states, and you can probably do more in your countries. I will pause here. Be careful, beware of comparisons, because the proportion of the different professions in each country can vary. Some countries may have a lot of nurses, which I say over-representation of nurses in the panels. Other countries may have an over-representation of GPs in the panel. Take those results for yourselves in member states or by profession and use them for yourself. But at this stage, be aware of comparisons or benchmarking between countries. What about receiving information and changing practice? One question, in the last 12 months, do you remember receiving any information about avoiding unnecessary prescribing or administration or dispensing of antibiotics? We still have 30% that didn't receive this information. So we have an area where we can improve. And then the follow-up question, for those who received, on the basis of the information that you received, have you changed your practice? And 42% said yes, that's good. 43% said, no, I didn't change. But out of those, 82% said, I was doing it anyway. Well, that's what they report. Let's hope that everybody is doing this. This is encouraging. If we provide information, there will be a change or a confirmation that people are doing the right thing. What about the capabilities, opportunities, and motivation of prescribers? I have a key role, number 2, in helping control antibiotic resistance, very high. I consider antibiotic resistance when I'm treating a patient, very high. I have access to the guidelines that I need to treat infection, but just look above. I'm confident when I'm making my decisions, much less. So all the guidelines are there. Do I have confidence in antibiotic guidelines? Much less. So we need to do something. We need to provide trusted information and independent guidelines and diffuse them in those networks of doctors to make sure that they feel safe. And what is the frequency of antibiotic prescription during the last 1 week? Because we felt people, prescribers could not remember more than 1 week. In which would I prefer not to prescribe an antibiotic? Well, it's 31% of a prescription. And with reasons that were given, the most common reason that the fear that the patient's situation would deteriorate or the fear of complications. Other reasons were being uncertain about the diagnosis, not being able to follow up on the patient because the patient may move to another country or another region, limited time to explain why an antibiotic may not be indicated, and finally, trying to maintain a good, patient relationship, customer provider relationship. But this comes overway in the end. So we have an element of fear, and again, we need to provide materials and diffuse materials that will reassure the prescribers that they're doing the proper actions. So in conclusion, well, the perceived knowledge about antibiotic resistance is high. The healthcare workers are generally quite knowledgeable about antibiotics and antibiotic resistance, and much more than the general population. The doctors being the most knowledgeable professional group. When it comes to hand hygiene practices, then the nursing professionals who would have the highest reported correct knowledge. However, there are clear knowledge gaps that remain, for example, in relation to prudent use of antibiotics. Over the past year, about 1/3 of the respondents had not received information about avoiding unnecessary prescribing, administration, dispensing of antibiotics. Only around 40% of the respondents think there has been effective promotion of good practice and information about antibiotic resistance in their country. Confidence in available antibiotic guidelines was expressed by less than 70% of the prescribers. And fear of patient deterioration account for 43% of antibiotic prescriptions when the prescriber would have preferred not to prescribe an antibiotic. This is just an excerpt of a 200-page report that is now available on the ECDC website. This is good for communication, but we are working in your country with your professionals, and you will find more detailed information as part of the report. I mentioned the differences between countries in terms of the sample of professionals. So we already know by today that we will need to improve to get more comparable results between countries. And we can already say that we will attempt within, let's say, 3 years to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I urge you, those of you who haven't read the 200 pages, please do this evening. It's very interesting, really. I'd like to go on with you, John Kinsman. You're an expert in social and behavior change communication at ECDC. In the survey that you presented just now, Dominic Monet, you used the COMB model. Can you explain what it is and how it was used?
Okay, I don't know, can we get back to the slide?
It's here.
Oh, there, brilliant, okay. So this is a model that was used, and it's quite widely used in social science. I'm an anthropologist, so the kind of thing I find quite interesting. And I just want to say, many people who, when they see models or frameworks for behavior change, it can be somehow intimidating. But I think this one is a very useful and quite easily grasped one. Basically, the principle is simple. If you have the capability to do something, if you have the opportunity to do something, and if you have the motivation to do something, then you're likely to do it. If any of those three are missing or somehow less than optimal, you're less likely to do it. And this is a very useful way of looking at an issue, whether it's antibiotic prescribing, whether it's HIV prevention, whether it's malaria prevention, whatever it may be. You can use this same model for many issues in health behaviors. In terms of capability, we're specifically looking at knowledge, particularly knowledge. So a lot of this, what we've been talking about here, is are they aware? Do they know the facts? And I think, as Dominique said, the doctors certainly have the highest level of knowledge, so they're looking pretty good there. Do they have the opportunity to make the best decisions in terms of prescribing? Well, that's another question. It may be that they don't have the resources to provide materials to patients. They don't have the time. That could also be seen as a resource. Do they have the motivation? Are they afraid? As we saw, 43% of the prescribers prescribed because they're afraid of complications. So their motivation to do prudent prescribing of antibiotics may be suboptimal, therefore. So basically, this is a very useful framework for looking at an issue. The questionnaire survey was designed with the COM in thinking. So there are different sections, each of which refer to whether it's capability, opportunity, or motivation. Similarly, if you're looking at intervention design, you can think in a similar sort of sense. How can I focus on the capability component? How can I improve motivation? How can I improve the opportunity to engage in better prescribing practices? So it's a useful model, therefore, for thinking about both designing a questionnaire to ascertain knowledge, attitudes, behaviors, but it's also a useful model when you're trying to think about designing and implementing an intervention.
Thank you very much. And I know that you have a background in working with several African and Asian countries. Do you see that this model is easy to implement in other countries as well?
I would say definitely it's a kind of universal model that you could use for human behavior wherever you are. In terms of, if you take, for example, opportunity, I was involved in a study previously before I joined ECDC in 3 countries in Asia and 3 countries in Africa, and we did a sort of inventory in catchment areas, looking at how much access the community had to antibiotics. And there was a huge range. South Africa, in a catchment area of around 50,000 people, there were exactly 6 places where people could get hold of antibiotics. And that's because, as far as we could see, it wasn't possible for people to buy them outside formal healthcare settings. By contrast, Vietnam, similarly around 65,000 people catchment area, there were quite literally 700 places where people could access antibiotics. And that includes, of course, government health centers, but it also includes private pharmacies. It includes little shops where you can buy margarine and rice. And it also includes the fellows walking around with a suitcase saying, I've got a blue one here and a red one here. So, in other words, the opportunities within the cultural context of Vietnam for inappropriate or imprudent, however you want to say it, antibiotic access are completely different from what you would find in a cultural setting in South Africa. So in that sense, the model, you can apply it in different settings and you can plug in different aspects of your situation according to wherever you are.
Thank you. And also, these results that you presented, Dominic, they show us, a lot of them shows that we need a behavioral change, which is kind of daunting when you hear that word. How long does it take, actually?
You're asking me?
I'm asking you, John.
If you look, basically humans are very slow at changing behavior. If you look at legislation to bring about seatbelts, that's something now that everybody in this room, I'm 100% certain, you don't get into a car without putting on your seatbelt. We just don't do that anymore. But if you think about your parents or your grandparents, they didn't do it in the same way that we do it today. So essentially it's taken a generation, probably, roughly, to bring about that, which is completely automatic. Similarly, if you look at HIV in the 1980s, which was obviously a very different situation from what we have today because of no antiretrovirals, the behavior change that would be needed then was within a different epidemiological, social, cultural context. But nonetheless, even within that very frightening framework, it took a very long time for people to internalize and say, yes, I will use condoms, yes, I will reduce my number of partners. So the sort of cultural milieu to bring about that change took 1, 2, 3 decades. Now, I think it's much more a given, although, of course, there are counters to it also. But I think the point is that culture can change, and what we're talking about here, whether it's safe sex or whether we're talking about seatbelts or whether we're talking about smoking in a pub, it does change, but it takes time. Similarly with this, it's something that we can't expect to take place like that. And as someone said this morning, this is something which needs sustained efforts over many years, and not only through the health service, it has to take place through many, many different type of actors and stakeholders. And it was nice to hear the colleague over there earlier saying that civil society also very much wants to play a role in this, because this is a multi-sectoral, multifactorial, long-term project.
Thank you very much, John. Moving forward to Marie-Cécile Ploy. You're project coordinator for EU GEMRI. Can you tell us briefly about the work of EU JAMRI and in particularly the work you're doing with healthcare workers on raising awareness and about prudent antibiotics and addressing the antibiotic resistance? Tell us more about your work.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I would like to thank ECDC colleagues and particularly Andrea and Dominic for inviting me to give the opportunity to explain what we do within the JAMRI. So JAMRI is Joint Action on Antimicrobial Resistance and Healthcare-Associated Infections. And it is the unique place gathering all member states and all stakeholders in the field to work together to fight against AMR. So we in the same place, we have the opportunity to exchange and discuss. And as Charles Price said before, we within JAMRI have the opportunity also to exchange best practices within the different member states. And healthcare workers, it's very interesting, and congratulations to ECDC for this huge work and very interesting results. And we conducted, and I was very interested by the lowest percentage about the question about transmission, and it refers to infection control and prevention measures. And we've done, within JAMRI, we conducted also 2 surveys about infection control and prevention in healthcare workers, and also including the hospital administrators and national bodies. And what we observed is that there is a gap between when we interviewed the hospital administrators and national bodies about what they think about the implementation of infection control and prevention measures and the knowledge on the ground. And it has been said this morning also. And so that's very interesting. And this morning also it has been raised the importance of training and education. And so we are now conducting pilots in in 5 countries in Europe to test what we call the universal infection control framework, to work with all actors, including the hospital administrators, to see how we can change behaviors. And you talk about culture, and it's very interesting because the objective of this implementation of this pilot is to increase the culture of all the health organizations within the country.
Thank you. And how's your work been able to develop? You spoke a little about it, but if you can develop synergies on the issue, like exchanging lessons learned from other European settings to another.
We conducted country-to-country visits, and Dominic talked about the importance of country visit and talking directly with the actors on the ground. So we conducted country-to-country visit to gain a better understanding of current political willingness and barriers to implement actions. And we emphasize that on the One Health approach, about national research priorities, about incentives for stimulating innovation, about antibiotic stewardship, about infection control and prevention, and about surveillance in animals. And it's very interesting because these country-to-country visits are peer reviews. So people from the Ministry of Health or Ministry of Agriculture in one country talk to the same people in another country. So they can exchange best practice, and they can have, and already some countries have taken best practice from another country. And also about the One Health approach, it's very important to increase awareness. And in your survey, I think that I've read that there are few people that know about the One Health approach and about that in Europe it is forbidden now to use antibiotics as feed additives.
Yes,
am I right?
Definitely not enough.
Yeah, and so that's why when we start the joint action, we first perform a social media listening to know more about AMR conversation in this Twitter, etc., all these social media channels. And we saw that the term One Health is barely mentioned. So we decided to now conduct a social media campaign based on this One Health approach. And the idea is to give a common message, meaning that that's what we call the One Health butterfly effect. Why butterfly effect? Because individual small changes can have very large collective effects. So everybody can flap their wings and so change the One Health, create the One Health butterfly effect.
Thank you so much for that, Marie-Cécile Bloy. Moving forward to you, Ingrid Smith, Technical Officer at WHO AMR Division. Which of the findings from this study that Dominic presented recently, if any, could inform your work? What do you see? How does it help you?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for the invitation. I'm here actually for WHO Euro, but I work at the WHO headquarters in Geneva. When I saw the results, I thought I had seen it before, because we have performed studies among healthcare workers where I worked before, and fear is a huge driver when it comes to antibiotic prescribing. We found exactly the same, that it's fear for patients who have a severe disease, or fear when patients have an unclear diagnosis. That is when they overprescribe or they prescribe to like the last resort antibiotics because they're just scared. So coming back to the COMS model that you were talking about, I think that is one of the key issues that we have to address. In the WHO, I've been working with a toolkit for antimicrobial stewardship programs in low-middle income country hospitals. So antimicrobial stewardship, in short, it's optimized antibiotic use. That's what it's all about. And what we are looking for, which we are hoping that the ECDC and the EU could help us with, is that in countries there is a huge need for evidence-based guidelines, treatment guidelines, that people can trust. I'll give you an example of a real-time situation to show you what does it mean to help people optimize antibiotic use. I was working on optimizing antibiotic use, and we were working with a hematology department. So it was a department working on patients with blood cancer, which is very fitting as we have hanging in a thread as a topic today. And they were using a lot of last resort antibiotics. And we started to discuss with them, and it turned out they were using it because that was the treatment that was suggested in international cancer protocols. So when we discussed with them and told them, but resistance rates here are very, very low, and we showed them the resistant rates, and after a while we got them to use more narrow spectrum antibiotics, until they had 2 patients who died in a very short period of time, and both had blood culture isolates of multi-drug resistant bacteria. Needless to say, it was back to square one, and they used the last resort antibiotics. So talking about behavior change, they need tools that they can trust, and they need people that they can trust. And they need the support, they need the capacity, they need leaders who are going in front and saying, this is what we're going to do. They need targets that are meaningful to them, and they need then support with surveillance and also the feedback on antibiotic use.
So more tools, and you're urging the ECDC for more tools. What do you say on that, Dominic?
Well, first, I will redirect a question. ECDC doesn't have a mandate to produce treatment guidelines. So we're stuck there. We can encourage the countries to develop their own independent guidelines, but we don't have a mandate. Now, as part of the European Antibiotic Awareness Day, we've been working 12 years now, so we developed materials that we tested first in English with member states, and then translated into all the EU languages, the 24 EU official languages. And for each type of healthcare professionals, there are things that they should know, and that also covers the hospital administrator, and things they can do. So we suggest things they could do within their own little area of mandate competence. It's probably not enough, but that's where we are right now, and we need to advertise more on this. I think if every health professionals would read this one-pager, what you should know, what you can do, that would give them at least an area where they think they can do something. That would not relieve the fear and the fear of the consequences. But that's the first thing that we can do tomorrow.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to go back to one of the results which I find really interesting, that only 63% felt that they had a key role in helping control antibiotic resistance, which is that you sort of leave responsibility to, it's not my fault, it's someone else. We all recognize that. Can you please, John?
This is conjecture because we don't really know, and this is one of the challenges with a survey, is that it's you're asking a question, and to interpret the answer is not always very straightforward. As an anthropologist, I always want to then dive in and do something qualitative and get something richer, but we don't have that. So conjecture here, the difference between people understanding that they have a role to play and understanding that this is something that they should be concerned about was clear. And I think my reading of it is not that they don't care about it, but rather they don't necessarily think that they have the tools themselves to do what they need to do in the clinical context, that they may not feel sufficiently empowered in terms of communication skills with patients or whatever it may be. So I think it's unfair, and I think it's probably a mistake to say they don't care, because I'm sure they do. I think rather it's that they may feel that they don't have the tools to do something about it, and the particular wording of the question means that we have a response which is difficult to interpret.
Okay. Ingrid Smith, please.
I have a slightly different opinion. I think that they don't feel the personal responsibility to actually influence this, because they have more than enough with caring for their patient. A clinician's focus is their patient in front of them. And to think of kind of the societal impact of what I am doing, that's not the focus of a healthcare professional. So I don't think it is bad will or anything. It's just that it's not their focus to have a public health perspective of things. They have focus on their patients.
Okay. Yes, John.
Except that, and I don't have the number in my head, but a good proportion of them took into account antibiotic resistance when they made an antibiotic prescription. So it's not that they weren't doing it out of that context. And I think here you've got that terrible sort of issue. You've got someone who's sick in front of you who very much needs your help and your support, and that's your immediate concern. And the sort of broader public, the commons, as it were, is more abstract, and so not your immediate concern. So I think that they are thinking about it, but they don't have the tools to do what they need to do. And I think also it may have to do with, and I know this is probably a contentious issue, but rapid diagnostic tests, I understand, is something that previously people have been discussing in this context. It seems to me that surely should be something that would ameliorate this problem to some extent. We've talked about this. I don't know if you have any thoughts on it here.
No, not really. I mean, in the community, for the general practitioners, there are some tests that are used every day in Scandinavian countries, that are used less in Southern Europe, either because they're considered too expensive or because the infrastructure, the workflow at the general practitioner office does not allow for these tests to be used. If there's only one doctor, possibly a part-time secretary, and no nurse in the GP office, the doctor doesn't have time to do the test and make the person wait. And so then they're not used as much as they should be. Now we would need more tests for multi-drug resistant bacteria to be used in the hospital setting. There are tests that can be done on a culture after 24 hours. There are probably tests that have been experimented that can be done directly on the biological sample, but they are not used to the extent that we would like them to be used. So there's a gap somewhere here, to the point that there's a price that has been put forward in the UK called the Longitude Prize. Longitude Prize is whoever find one of those tests gets 10 million British pounds.
Yes. Marie-Cécile Ploy, what stood out for you when you read this, when you read the results, and how can you use them in your work?
I think the main thing is, once again, it's about the result, about the knowledge about transmission. And I am a clinical microbiologist, and I head the infection control committee in my hospital. And we are dealing currently with an outbreak with multi-resistant Klebsiella. And we work every day with the teams, with the healthcare worker, because it's very hard also for them each day. But we still see how it is important to educate, train, explain, because it's complicated. There are so many different resistant genes, and so we speak about different outbreaks with acronyms and for the different enzymes. So it's difficult for them also to understand all these things, and we really need to train. And I think that's the results about the knowledge about transmission is important. That's why, once again, awareness, communication campaign, but including all the staff.
Thank you. And ending question to you, Dominic. What does this result tell you about the actions now that ECDC have to take in order to promote prudent antibiotic use? So the magic answer?
We're still with a mandate where we can only provide tools and support for member states. So at the next meeting of the Technical Advisory Committee for European Antibiotic Awareness Day, we will discuss the final results. We had discussed preliminary results that helped us improve the quality of a report, but now we'll need to say, what do we do from there? We'll probably take a year or two to develop new materials. We definitely need to working on knowledge would be easy at our level. I think working on changing behavior it's something that can only be done by member states and by the hospitals in member states. But working at giving tools so the member states can inform and improve the knowledge of the healthcare workers, that's something that we could probably do. I was thinking about the last three questions where the knowledge is not high enough.
I see. Thank you very much. And I'm sure that, yes, there's a lot of questions from the audience. I'll start down there, please.
Okay. So thanks a lot for the presentation. I'm Lucia. I'm working for Health First Europe. We are a multi-stakeholder platform working for ensuring that innovation and safety is part of healthcare delivery. Just a question for John and Dominic from ACDC. And first of all, thanks for mentioning the role of innovative diagnostic tool for tackling MR. I just have a comment to make in general about the survey. I think it's great to see finally like some data about hand hygiene practices, and great to see the nurses are the first one in the front line showing that they can really make a difference. It will be nice also to see also in the future this kind of data for other preventive measures, like rapid diagnostic tools as well, vaccination, to be recognized by the Parliament as a great way to ensure antimicrobial resistance. I'm aware that, of course, diagnostic tools, they might be costly at the moment, and as well it's a time concern that Dominic mentioned, but yeah, just as a note for the future, it would be nice to see a similar survey about behavior and aptitude of workforce towards these other preventive measures.
Okay, thank you. So that wasn't really a question, but maybe you can address.
Or an extended survey.
Yes.
Next time we do the survey, and making sure that we take into account other aspects that are related to antimicrobial resistance, although not directly. Yeah.
Thank you. Next. Yes, please. Yes, you'll have the microphone.
Yes, thank you very much for your presentation. My name is Anna-Leena Lohiniva. I come from the Finnish Institute of Health and Welfare. And I really enjoyed reading the survey from the very beginning. I think also for one that we are getting out of this discussion about the knowledge alone, because we all know that it cannot alone change the behavior. So having these perceptions and other ideas, I think it's going to move the course of thinking and discussion about antimicrobial resistance. So I think it's very important in that sense. And of course, it's already providing a lot of data that can be really used in communication, as many people mentioned. And second thing that I think it's also showing very clearly is the fact that the context is different, and different countries are bringing different results, as we're saying. So the importance of looking these things in the context-specific manner, I think it's very important. In Finland alone, we can see in antibiotic consumption differences between the regions. So it's clear that this context specificity is there, and probably different strategies are needed, whether it's a comb strategy or another model which is working, and any of them are very much needed to change the course and getting into behavior change. My questions to ECDC is, in the end, is there plans perhaps to initiate a network with behavior change experts or behavior change people interested in working on it and move forward? I think one of the issues that lessons learned platforms are kind of missing currently about AMR and behavior change, and a lot of initiatives, things are taking place in the world, but we don't really know what's happening and what are the, what are the lessons learned and the best practices in this matter. Thank you.
John or Dominic would like to answer.
Well, what you're asking us is to develop another network.
Yes.
So that's why I contemplated, but I don't know how we. But you have a point. I mean, you have a point. A network of people that would work on behavior change for all sorts of communicable diseases, not just antimicrobial resistance, may make sense. Make sense, but as of now, it's not something that we consider.
Thank you. Any other? Yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Rens van Dobbenburg, Federation of Veterinarians of Europe. Thank you for your interesting presentation. Of course, a pity the veterinary sector was not included in this survey, but fortunately, we conducted one similar survey some years ago as FE, together with the heads of medicine agencies. And this survey was focused on the prescribing behavior, of course, of veterinarians. And the results, in order of importance, were that influencing factors were prescribing behavior were recorded as sensitivity testing, own experience, risk for antibiotic resistance, and ease of administration. And we imagine that awareness has been raised even more since then. And then to my question, for us it's important that there's an existing lack of availability of rapid, reliable, and affordable diagnostics. And the question is, how can the EU help to bring these products faster to market?
Yes, so who can answer that question? Dominic.
Well, I don't have expertise in veterinary use.
Yes.
But maybe that's your research. Want to say something? Would you please repeat your question?
Yes, please.
My question was...
Your last question.
Sorry?
Would you please repeat your last question?
How EU can help and assist to bring these products, these diagnostics, rapid, affordable, reliable, etc., faster to market than happens at this moment.
Okay.
Because there's a lack of availability.
Okay. In the veterinary field and in human medicine.
Mm.
My field is the veterinary.
Your field is veterinary.
I don't have expertise in the other one.
No, but we don't have a mandate for this. Unfortunately, we don't have a mandate. Each country can develop its own policies and may decide to, push a certain diagnostic test. I remember when France decided to promote the strep A test to be used by general practitioners, there was no mechanism so this could actually be reimbursed. And the country developed a system so actually the doctors could order the tests for free from the national insurance system. So that was a way to circumvent a difficulty for access for the general practitioners, and suddenly the tests were used. There may be a similar mechanism that can be developed by member states.
Maybe not in the mandate of ECDC, but if you look to the development of other, for example, pharmaceutical products in the veterinary sector, it is in the mandate of the Commission, for example. And we have a new regulation on that part, but diagnostics are not in it.
And unfortunately, we're not at ECDC in a position to answer your question.
Okay.
You should please put this question to the Commission. Thank you.
You know, you can state your question on our Facebook channel. I will try to find an answer for you. Thank you very much. I know that in the room we have some key stakeholders, and your professions were also in this survey. And I'm wondering, do we have any from the PGEU in the room, or please? What did this survey tell you? What stood out?
My name is Michał Byliniak. I'm president of the PGU. From our perspective, of course, it shows how the interest with the antibiotic awareness differs country by country. Of course, there is a question of the number of answers and so on, but for sure we see that there are huge differences, and there are general, like for practitioners, that the Western Europe is much more advanced, the Eastern Europe has something to develop. But for sure we see that that there is huge need to strengthen the involvement of the pharmacists within this field, because each patient who is taking medicines, he's visiting pharmacy, and sometimes there is no time for the doctor to inform about everything. Sometimes patients cannot remember everything, so the pharmacy is the perfect place to remind or to give the information which missed. So for sure we see that there is a huge space, and for sure the pharmacists will still support ECDC, and we will be very open, happy to submit more information and to convince more pharmacists to provide the survey if it will be provided. I'm sure that this is a very good direction.
Do you feel that you have the pharmacists? Do they have the support they need from the EU to?
I feel that we are at the beginning of the route, because there is different approach when you are prescribing and different approach when you are delivering medicines. And of course, we've got two groups: the hospital pharmacists and the community pharmacists. And for sure, there is need to much more. To deliver much more specialized information, and to also inform and take care about member states, to give them information that not only nurses and doctors are the key players, but also the pharmacists. And of course, country by country, there are different regulations, there are different possibilities which pharmacists have, but for sure the member states should be supported about our group and our potential, because I feel that our potential is very big around this subject, for sure.
Thank you very much. I'd like to hear from more. Yes, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. My name is Annabel Ziebom from the Standing Committee of European Doctors, representing national medical associations across Europe. We are truly grateful to the ECDC for having conducted this survey, providing very comprehensive data. And I have to say, we're at the very beginning. We have to do our homework now, which we will do. We will analyze per profession, per country, for the doctor's profession per country, what it means to us. And we will certainly inform our membership with respect to each country and draw our conclusions from that. So thank you very much for providing this comprehensive report and the data. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please.
So Jean Weinbach from the French Ministry of Health. And are there any lessons to be learned from other sectors on how to change behaviors, whether it's ranged from incentives, nudges, to more constraints or constraint framework, legal framework, obligations, and so on. Do you think we have explored all possibilities that could be provided by other fields?
Great question. Who'd like to? Please, Ingrid Smith.
No, I'm just thinking, as an example, how to use governance and regulation, as you say, because we have two countries, Norway and Sweden. They're pretty similar, but they're very different in that the GPs in Sweden are in fact employed by the län, the area. So there is a governance structure to the GP. Whereas in Norway, there's none so ever. So the Norwegian GPs can do whatever they like. There are no restrictions. And a little bit more the other way around when it comes to hospitals, because hospitals in Norway are very strictly under, they get. So there are different mechanisms that you can use that can help. For example, having a clear governance structure and having accountability and responsibilities has shown to push a behavior change, to have good targets, specific, meaningful targets, not at the high national level necessarily, but even at a ward level. What is meaningful to the doctors or the healthcare workers at a more local area, which is that it is meaningful for them to work towards, for example. So you can have some at the top and some at the bottom, or two things. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, John, please.
Also, I'm just thinking about, there's a sort of wonderful health promotion concept, make the healthy choice the easy choice. And that's been applied in all sorts of different areas, from legislative to nudging different behaviors and so on. Like, for example, taking away vending machines for cigarettes. Therefore, the easy choice is not to buy cigarettes for under 18-year-olds because they're simply not there. So you change the environment so that the easy choice, whatever that may be, is also the healthy choice. And I think one of the findings that jumped out at me was, in fact, the Commissioner mentioned it, I think, this morning, 75% of people who have direct patient or public involvement say that they had easy access to guidelines. And he said this is a good thing, and indeed it is a good thing. But putting it the other way, it means that 25%, 1 in 4, don't. To me, that's a huge opportunity to be filled. So if you're looking at making the healthy choice the easy choice, surely the sort of the obligation of national authorities, one way or another, would be to make those guidelines easily accessible, because then they will, those with direct patient and public involvement it'll be much easier for them to access those, to read them, and then to act on them. And another finding which I thought was very, very revealing, and again, it asks a lot of questions what it really, really means, but I still think it's worth mentioning. I think it was 68% of the people, of those again with direct patient or public involvement, said that they trusted the guidelines. Wow, what does that mean? That means that 32% don't? What does that tell us? Why? What are they not trusting? Is it they think they're wrong, or is it they think that they're not giving them enough information? What is there? So that, again, that presents, in my mind, an opportunity to try and understand what that really means and to fill that gap. And in that sense, by filling that gap, you're making the healthy choice, in other words, the choice of prudent support, the easy choice.
You wanted to say?
Yeah, no, I just want to have a comment, and that is that even though there was a higher percentage who said they had access to the guidelines than that they actually used them. So there is a huge implementation work to be done once you have a guideline before people actually use them.
Okay, so with these findings, we want to look at the future. How can we actually use the findings now? And in terms of how do we go about the behavior change? I'd like to hear a concrete answer. Like, is there a way, and not just more concrete? How do we do that?
We're still reflecting about this. We're still editing the report 10 days ago, so it's all new also for us. But I said, making sure that we can cover the knowledge gaps is one thing. If we become really creative and working with the technical advisory committee, we may find areas where we could relieve the fears. Like I said, we cannot produce guidelines for treatment of the different kind of infections. So we'll need to find a pathway working with member states to make sure that those guidelines exist. There have been discussions as part of the technical advisory committee to develop an app that would be a shell where people could just plug in their guidelines, but the shell is for free. Translation, as long as the file that serves as the source for filling the app and the shell, is in one language, well, your app will be in the language of this data source. So we've been thinking about things like this, but nothing concrete as of now.
Okay, so when asked which topics respondents would like to receive more information on, 47% replied links between the health of humans, animals, and the environment. What steps are needed to fulfill that demand? That's a concrete question, though.
Well, we had hard data. We were 3 agencies working together. When was it? 2 years ago. We'll have an updated data, and now with trends in a year from now. So I take your word. We need to produce the communication material that go with the hard-to-swallow report, and to make sure that those are used. That would be one way of doing it.
Yes, John.
Not exactly related to that specific point, but just in more general terms, I think this focus, of course, is on health workers. But if you're looking from the point of view of the public, I think it's quite clear that you mentioned much higher understanding, of course, about antibiotics amongst doctors and health workers than the general public, and that famous, I think, 43% of people who know that viruses who think that viruses can also be addressed by antibiotics. So there's clearly an issue with public awareness, and I think the problem here is that it's such a nuanced, complicated subject. The public hasn't necessarily really grasped the issues in a way that makes it easy for doctors to talk with them in an easy way. And I think what we're missing, and this is not something that anyone can do, it's something that you hope will just emerge, will be a sort of a Greta Thunberg equivalent for antibiotics. And I don't know quite what form that would take, but someone or some thing or some event or something that becomes iconic, whereby people can then relate to it. Because I think people don't really relate to this in a way that's very tangible. And interestingly, if you then compare it to, for example, vaccination, vaccine disinformation is something which is very prevalent and which we're very much dealing with at ECDC. But that fits in, that's something that people will talk around the dinner table. It's something that fits within a broader sort of political narrative that's going on in the world today. Whereas with antibiotics, it doesn't have that same kind of salient in people's minds. And I think it would be what we could wish for, and how that happens and what form it would take, we don't know. But what we would wish for would be for something to happen whereby people would get it. And it would then become something which people would say, aha, now this is something really, really serious. Because the problem is when we're talking about 10 million people who may be dying every year in 2050, it's something of an abstraction. It's a huge number. It's so difficult. It's so huge. It's difficult for me to really grasp what it means. And in that sense, it's not necessarily that helpful. It's bigger than I can handle. Similarly with climate change, it's such a big thing. How can I handle it? So something is needed, and again, what form it takes, we have to see. But if that could appear, and if we could all be looking out for something like that to help it, nurture it, and bring it onto the stage so that people would become more aware of this, I think that would be a wonderful move.
And a little tiny step in that direction we'll be talking about a little bit later.
Yeah.
Yes, Ingrid.
No, I just have a comment to what you said. I think we have a very good example here today. HIV movement was very much fronted by HIV positive people. They had a great community that really promoted the issue. And I think, for example, cancer patient organizations have a job to do when it comes to what does antibiotic resistance mean, and to give face to the impact of antimicrobial resistance. So I think we have a good, not Greta Thunberg, but at least a candidate here. And the second thing was that in the survey, it said that what do you listen most to? So one was guideline, and the other was group discussions, and actually not the champion. The champion came further down. So I think for people who have fear and they are insecure about how to do things right, and there's also evidence for it. There's done a lot of publications on group discussions among GPs, for example, shows that to build down the fear is very, very important for people to change behavior. It's the same in the hospital. We see it all the time. Their champions are very important, but we have to address the fear and give them security to do the right choices.
Thank you very much. Yes,
Apart from the Malta Independent, it's more of a comment.
Can you repeat? Please repeat.
It's Mark Rappa from the Malta Independent. It's a question more from a patient activist view, coming from the field of sexual health and HIV. I really like the comment of saying that HIV is a really good step to follow. I myself spoke at the European Personalized Medicine Summit last year, where personalized medicine is looking at the way HIV did its movement and its campaigning for it to be transposed into personalized medicine. The same could possibly be used also in antibiotic awareness. I feel quite upset that there aren't any, or at least to my knowledge, there aren't any patient organizations present. There's one which we've heard from earlier, but otherwise we've been speaking about top-bottom approach. That's true. We need more people in the healthcare systems. We need more people who have the resources to do the cultures and everything so they can give the right medication. But at the same time, if we are not going to put the patients first, after years of empowering the patient with patient's autonomy and patients who are demanding their clinicians to give them an antibiotic, we need to go to the basics. We need to go to bottom-top approach, because I feel that otherwise a top-bottom approach will only reach a particular sector of the society, whilst missing the rest of the population who might not use the same jargon which is used by the people in position.
So patient
we actually
representation.
have the European Patients Forum in the room.
The European, please. Yes, there you are, please.
Yes, hello, I'm Kaisa from European Patients Forum. Nice to meet you. I wanted to get my hand up in the earlier session, but there were too many other questions. But actually, and we heard from the great work of the Norwegian patient organizations. Yes, we have a job to do, even in the patient community. Because, sometimes this topic is too abstract for people to... We understand, our communities understand that it's an issue, but we have to make it real. And I have to actually appreciate the cooperation from ECDC, because we have started to work in our pan-European patient community. And sometimes you need to kind of show the statistics, you have to show the maps, and then you have to hear the stories. So I was listening to you, and also you talking about the healthcare professional survey, and I think that I would like to think about what we want to do also with that survey. Maybe we can repeat it in our community, for example, to make sure that at least the patients community have 100% knowledge of antimicrobial resistance. Maybe we are 150 million people out of the 500 million in Europe, but that's a start. And we can reach out to our network. So I'll be in touch with you later to discuss what more we can do.
Okay. Well, thank you very much to our panel. It was very insightful, and I hope that you got good answers to your questions. And a big hand to all of you. So we're not finished quite yet. We have a few more things on our program. We've heard of Greta Thunberg. Many of you have brought up Greta Thunberg. She's, of course, a huge symbol for the climate change movement. Every movement needs a symbol, like Greta Thunberg for climate change, and we have the pink ribbon for breast cancer, and we have the rainbow flag for the LGBT movement. And we also need a great symbol for antibiotic awareness. Marie-Cécile Floyd, please.
Thank you. And the talk of John was a perfect transition. So our mission in the EU-JAMA Joint Action is foster synergies to keep antibiotics working. These synergies need to include everyone: human and animal healthcare professionals, researchers, industry, policymakers, and, most importantly, citizens as patients. So within the JAMA, we had an idea. Could there be a symbol representing antibiotic resistance that every patient, every citizen could easily recognize and identify? Would it be possible to raise their awareness about the specificity of antibiotics? Could we ensure that at the point of care, patient understands the importance of preserving these treatments through appropriate use? So today, we are launching a contest to find the first global antibiotic resistance symbol. And I would like to highlight that I am not talking about creating another logo. The symbol we are looking for should be something tangible, something anyone can make at home and everyone, anywhere, can wear. Something like the AIDS ribbon, which simplicity has made it enormously popular, raising awareness about AIDS and HIV around the globe. We want to invite everyone to be part of the process of reducing antibiotic resistance. We want to encourage each citizen to be change makers. We want to empower them to feel like key actors and take action. I think we have a short video to introduce the contest. It's only 1 minute.
Sorry.
Okay. So just while waiting, to learn more, you have postcards over there. Yes, Laura? To know more about the contest and how to apply. And we are accepting submission until the end of March. And the jury with senior academics and technical communication advisors will help us to choose the best symbol representing the global threat of antibiotic resistance. So, yes. Thank you. Just to finish, I've started talking about our mission, and I just would like to finish with our motto, bridging the gap between declarations and actions. So I invite all of you to take action by taking part in this contest and encouraging the public to participate, your children, your students, your grandparents. Everyone can participate. So now let's foster synergies to find the first global antibiotic-resistant symbol. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I had a few questions for you, but I think you answered them. It was like, why do we need this symbol to contribute to tackle the burden? But you.
It has been just
Yes,
said also by
just
John
said,
about
so
the change of behavior.
we all know the need for a symbol.
Yes, it has been
Yes.
said by everybody, the stakeholders, that
Yeah.
we have to be inclusive. For the moment, we still work too much in silo. So we have to work together and to really foster the synergies, and that AMR issue has to be understood by everyone.
Thank you so much. And for the closing remarks, before they come, I'd like to give a personal thanks for the ECDC for having the opportunity to moderate this fantastically informative event. I've learned so much, and I'm very honored to have heard all of you speakers and keynote speakers here today. Please welcome Andrea Amon for the closing remarks. Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to thank all of you because it was a very rich day. And I have now the task to summarize it and make some conclusions. It was very clear that what I said in the morning, awareness is good, yet it is not sufficient, came through the whole day. And the commissioner actually coined it very well. He said, well, AMR is still invisible. So the awareness is there, but not in the media, not for everyone to see. So we still have a lot to do. It became also clear that antimicrobial resistance is a multifaceted, multi-stakeholder, complex field. And we had some results that were encouraging, like that the consumption decreased over the past years, 6.5%, that the resistance is for some bug-drug combinations slowly declining, for others at a plateau, which is also encouraging, but still it doesn't say that we are there yet. And then we had the survey, which also showed that there are some good results, but there's also some things where we have to work on. And a few things stuck out here, in particular that the trust in guidelines is not there. Although I remember I have been in the ministerial conference on AMR in Bucharest, where the stakeholders that sat around the table there said, well, we don't need any more guidelines. We have all what we need. We just have to implement it. Well, that may be right, but if those that should implement it don't trust them, it doesn't help. So here we have to look into more, as was said, more treatment guidelines that are trusted. And here there was the plea during the day saying that, well, there is a role for the professional societies. Maybe that would be something that they could devote time on. But how can we do better? How do we overcome the barriers for implementation? Well, I have a few areas that were mentioned today. One is, and that's very clear, it needs a cross-sector collaboration. I mean, we're all here coming from different angles. And also here it was very clearly said that stakeholders should be more involved in the future. We heard that the veterinarians had made some progress in reducing antibiotic resistance or the use of antibiotics. We have One Health action plans, but not in every country. So here more work needs to be done. There is still the big unknown in the environment. What do residues, what path do they take? Do they come back to us like the microplastics? Do they come via the food, via the water, via the soil? We don't know yet. So here is work to do. And also it's very clear that the agencies that were here, EFSA, Medicines Agency, ECDC, and the Environment Agency need to intensify their work together. One big area that was mentioned was research. And also here the environment is one of the areas that should be addressed. There are no clues for marketing new drugs. There might be some in the pipeline, very up the road, but not very close. We heard that there is research on alternative therapies. We need more diagnostic tests, quick diagnostic tests that are reliable and easy to use. There wasn't so much today on vaccines because there was at one point a lot of discussion that, you know, infections that you can prevent through vaccines, you don't have to treat with antibiotics. So that may also be something that we should still look at. However, it was also mentioned that the translation of any of these results into the practice, down to the ground, to the practitioners, takes way too long. Financing is one of the things when we come back to the drugs that is hampering. And that is in particular because there are no models, financing business models found. There are some that are looked into, but there is not yet a valid model that could provide a good incentive for pharmaceutical companies. It was also said that money is necessary, funding, and there were remarks saying, well, there are these structural funds, so in case the battle against antimicrobial resistance needs some structural changes in countries, there might also be funds for that, and there would be support in how to help countries to find these funds. Then there was a debate on education, and that is education for those healthcare professionals that are already in the profession, that are already working. And here the professional societies offered themselves as a means to help here. But then we should also think about healthcare professionals to be the ones in the universities. And I know a lot of student organizations, I don't know whether they're still here, but I know they're, yes, they're all here, so very good. And I think they're very engaged. However, even the student organization, you know, once the students are there, can help to a certain degree. In my view, we still need to see how we can get these contents on antimicrobial resistance, but also others, on vaccines, for instance, more into the curricula. Because I think it should be not up to the creativity and the enthusiasm of societies. It should be statutory. It should be very clear. This is something that the society expects from a doctor, a nurse, a dentist, a pharmacist, a veterinarian to know. And that, I think, is something, as John said, it's a change that will take some time, but if it will not happen if we don't start. And lastly, there was what can the EU do? Because it is very clear, and it has been mentioned, that, I mean, the real change in the ward, in the hospital, has to be done there by the people that are working there. But there are still things that the EU level can do. And there were, some of them were mentioned. We are doing these One Health country visits, where not only ECDC, EFSA, and the Commission is there, but we also invite someone from another country. So it's a kind of peer review where also countries can learn from each other. And I have heard numerous examples from countries that had such visits that it was one of the most worthwhile things they had, and it provided them exactly the means to go forward as they wanted. So that is certainly something that we will keep. I mentioned countries learning from each other, and that can happen here. We bring countries together in our networks where they can exchange their practices, and even if a practice is not a translatable one-to-one, there might be elements that still can be used by another country. And one of these things that we have is this repository where every country can put their guidelines, their information material, whatever they have there, so that it is publicly usable. And lastly, there was this term, the One Health butterfly effect. I really liked it because this is really what happens. And what you can see when these countries talk to each other, that they pick up ideas and then they start making movements. So I think this is a very nice picture. New network. It sounds enticing. We certainly will reflect on this, but my first reaction is, no, that would be another silo that we have to integrate. So I think we have to bring these experts that know more about behavior change and how you can analyze what these questions that we have in this survey, take them further. We should bring them in, not create a separate network where they talk among themselves and the others talk among themselves. So that's my first reaction. Lastly, there was mentioned at one point targets. And I know that is something that will be very difficult to achieve. And I think it is what we need to have. Because when you have a target, you have a goal. And then you start trying to measure, and then you start trying to do. I mean, that is, there are so many examples where it works. We just need to have a good consensus on the targets. They can't be imposed. They have to be developed together. But I think that will be something that really can help. So there is a lot to do. Thank you for joining us doing it. And I hope I see all of you next year again. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you again, and have a wonderful evening and afternoon. Thank you.